just a sec. Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us for our September monthly meeting. Really excited to have you here. Can't believe it's already September. I want to just jump in with a few quick NAMI Northern Virginia announcements before we get started with our presentation. As many of you know, NAMI Walks is coming up. It is less than 2 weeks away. NAMI Walks is our biggest annual fundraising and awareness event of the year. It's happening on Saturday, October 9th. It's not too late to start a team and get fundraising and to join us virtually on Saturday, October 9th. We also do have some in-person and virtual activities happening on the 9th that you can check out by visiting our Walk website at namiwalks.org/Northern Virginia. You can also register there. We hope you can come to join us for that event. And hopefully we'll be able to come together virtually this year. With that, I am going to pass it over to our presenter today. We have Mara Watts from Postpartum Support Virginia. We're really excited for this presentation, so I'm going to let Mara introduce herself.
Thank you. I'm actually going to go ahead and share my screen and then we'll get started. Very happy to be here. All right. Let's see. All right, so my name is Mara Watts. I actually wear a few hats. So I work for Postpartum Support Virginia. I'm the director of outreach and education there. So do a lot of these presentations, just trying to get the word out about perinatal mood and anxiety disorders and kind of like close the gap a bit. And we'll talk a little bit about that during my presentation. I'm also a licensed counselor. I work in a private practice right now in Fairfax, and in actually a couple of weeks, I'm moving over to work at Inova Fairfax as the therapist on the floor at the NICU. I'm also a mom. I have a 6.5-year-old and a 3-year-old and had postpartum anxiety after the 6.5-year-old. So I'm an open book on that. We'll answer any questions. So here are my goals for tonight is really for us all to get on the same page about perinatal mood and anxiety disorders. We call them PMADs for short. I just want everybody sort of, kind of have this wave of like information go out so that we know what we're looking for, how to talk about it, and just sort of like the ins and outs of what we're looking at here. We're going to look at all the different PMADs so you know sort of what to look for, what to ask. I'm going to teach you how to have an honest conversation with somebody about perinatal mood and anxiety disorders, and also allow you to ask me any sort of honest and open questions. I want to give you some resources to use and how to contact us if you ever are concerned about anybody. And then I'm going to throw a lot of information at you very quickly, and then we'll open up for conversation and questions that you might have, because I certainly want to be able to answer any of the questions in the direction that you all want to go. Okay, so PMADs are not as uncommon as we thought. So postpartum depression affects up to about 1 in 7 women. Postpartum anxiety and or depression or some of the other PMADs affects up to about 1 in 5 perinatal women. And up to about 1 in 2, about 44% of Black women will struggle with some sort of PMAD. This is all pre-COVID numbers too. I just want to put that out there. So this could be far higher once we look back and kind of get the numbers on this time. Perinatal mood and anxiety disorders are the #1 complication of pregnancy and childbirth. So again, even just being able to say to somebody like, this is the numbers on this is how common it is, can be really validating. Here are some of our high risk populations. So NICU families, up to about 70% will struggle with a PMAD. They're 40% more likely to get postpartum depression. And then again, about 25 to 45% will suffer from PTSD. Military moms, both active and dependent, about 20 to 50% of military moms will experience a PMAD. It's most frequently during that 6-week time frame. I'm not sure, I haven't found in the literature, anything that explains why it's that first 6 weeks, but that's sort of what we know. And then there was this recent NIH study of 192,000. And what they came up with was that they recommended rigorous screening, which I just, I think that's part of the problem here that we're seeing is that people really recommend screening, but no one's really taking it on as something that they're doing. So that's another place that we're getting these huge gaps. Black and African-American women. So again, as I talked about on the previous slide, about 1 in 2 Black women will experience some form of PMAD. fewer than half of those will be screened, and then fewer than 20% of those who are screened will be referred to resources for recovery. So you can see how, again, that gap sort of perpetuates itself along that line. And then Latina and Spanish-speaking women, up to about 40% of Spanish-speaking women will struggle, and most will never be screened and all face numerous barriers for treatment and recovery. So expectations versus reality. So we've really figured out that for the perinatal timeframe, that some of the issues come up based on what you expect is going to happen versus the reality of what actually happens. And here's some of the categories we've seen kind of like as themes throughout. So social support. This has happened, especially with COVID now, right? Like normally we'd say to somebody, go to a support group, go walk around Target with a friend, something like that. And now we can't do that. But this also has to do with how people expect their support system to show up. So for example, someone would say like, oh yeah, my mother-in-law is coming to stay right after the baby's born, and she's totally going to get up in the middle of the night. And then actually that doesn't happen, right? So some of these, like what I expect it's going to look like versus what it actually is like, can cause a lot of turmoil. Feeding the baby, there's a lot of pressure on new parents about how they're feeding their baby, whether they're going to breastfeed or formula feed. And there's a lot of narrative that goes into that in the beginning of having a baby. So did you expect that you were going to breastfeed and now it's not happening as easily? Do you not want to breastfeed and you're still dealing with some of those things? Again, the expectation versus reality. And the way that breastfeeding is painted in our society is that it's going to happen extremely easily. It's going to be a beautiful experience. And for many, many people, that is not the actual experience. Again, birth experience. Did you expect to have a natural birth and it ended up with a C-section? Was it more traumatic than you thought? Those sorts of things. This narrative of success versus failure, what makes a successful mother? Versus failure. And a lot of parents feel like they're failing even before they get home. So again, we find that to be really a contributor in the anxiety and depression. Loss and grief, and not just loss and grief when it comes to like if something happened to the child, but also just loss and grief of, life transitions, or I'm not pregnant anymore and I'm grieving that, or the role with my partner has changed. During COVID, we saw a lot of loss and grief. This isn't what I thought this time period would look like. So a lot of those issues too. Role of trauma. Trauma, your body remembers trauma. So there's a lot of people who feel like they've done great work. They've gotten past previous trauma, and then pregnancy, birth, postpartum can really bring up some of those feelings. Life circumstances. This is just a time where lots of things happen for people. So if somebody has switched jobs, they've had a death in the family, financial issues, that can be something that really makes an impact here. And then the reason we put medication on here is because medication can be really, really effective and a great option for people, but it doesn't have to be the only thing, and it doesn't have to be the first thing we try. So I think when we talk to pregnant or postpartum women and we talk about treatment, they automatically think we're talking about medication. If they don't want to do it, they're really resistant. So I want to at least put that out there. There's a lot of things that we can do to help support women during this time frame, and I will talk about that in just a minute. Okay, so what do PMADs feel like, right? Excuse me. I'm sorry, what do they say? We're going to do sound like first. So we hear a lot of, I'm supposed to be happy, or I should be. Why am I sad? I worry all the time. Why am I such a failure? I love my baby, but I hate my life. My marriage can't survive this. Having a baby was a mistake. Really want to normalize that one. It really feels heavy sometimes when you've had a baby. And that, again, this validation that these are really common thoughts can be extremely helpful. If only I could get a good night's sleep. I'm having thoughts that are scaring me. Why can't I snap out of it? I'm the worst mother in the world, and my family would be better off without me. So those are some of the things we hear. What do they feel like? Again, a lot of psychosomatic issues here. So I'm so tired, but I can't fall asleep. That's a huge one, a huge sign of anxiety. I have headaches that are constant and won't go away. My heart is racing. My body aches everywhere. I'm nauseous, but don't know why. And I feel dizzy and out of sorts. So again, just listing those a little bit in a different way. So symptoms are feeling overwhelmed, guilty, miserable, sad, Anxious. Anger was a big one that was sort of a missed symptom of depression and anxiety. People would talk to us and say like, well, I'm not sad and I'm not anxious, but I'm just really, really, really rageful. So we ask about that a lot. Brittleness, irritability, increased sensitivity, poor concentration, exhausted but can't sleep. Intrusive thoughts, this is a big one in this time frame. About 90% of the general population have intrusive thoughts. These are those thoughts that you have, like, I don't know about you all, but when I drove or, go over a big bridge, like the Bay Bridge, I always think, what would happen if my car drove off of it? And then I don't do it and keep going and carry on with my vacation. And that's an example of a very standard intrusive thought that does not affect functioning. Intrusive thoughts really increase in the perinatal time frame. So what we're looking at here is really how is it affecting functioning? And we'll talk a little bit more about that. Panic attacks, hypervigilance, again, unease or discomfort around the baby or lack of interest in the baby. Here's some of like the most common intrusive thoughts that we see: dropping the baby off the balcony, throwing baby down the stairs, pushing my baby in the oven, pushing the stroller into traffic, letting go of the baby in the bathtub. Some of those are the standard intrusive thoughts. And again, they're not automatically concerning. What we look at is the functioning. So the thought of dropping my baby off the balcony, but then you still go out on the balcony, is not affecting functioning. But if you're having that thought and now you no longer will even go to the room that the balcony is attached to, then we're looking at, again, that change in functioning. So here's the spectrum of illnesses that we see. So again, perinatal is the moment of conception to the baby's first birthday. So we're talking about roughly that 2-year period. And we have the mood disorders, which are depression and bipolar disorder. And then this is the list of the anxiety disorders that we see. So general anxiety, panic attacks, obsessive compulsive disorder, and then post-traumatic stress disorder or PTSD. So again, looking at sort of the spectrum when we talk about, baby blues, right? So about 85 to 90% of new moms will have baby blues. This comes on in the first 72 hours and resolves in 2 to 3 weeks. And that's a big thing to look at here, because while something more serious can come on in those first 2 to 3 weeks, if you just see symptoms like are listed here, mood swings, tearfulness, irritability, anxiety, loneliness, we're really prescribing a treatment of social support and sleep and trying to see what happens during those first 2 to 3 weeks. If it's after that, then we're looking at it to be something a little bit different. These perinatal mood and anxiety disorders, again, about 20%. The onset is during pregnancy or that first year postpartum. Here are some of the symptoms. They look a lot like the baby blues, but they don't resolve during that first 2 to 3 weeks. And the treatment will be a combination of self-help, social support, talk therapy, or medication. Not all of them necessarily, but some combo of that. And then we have psychosis, which is about 1 to 2 in 1,000. This is a rapid onset. It usually comes on within those first 2 weeks. There is a link that they're seeing in the research to an undiagnosed bipolar disorder pre-pregnancy, and the lack of sleep really exacerbates the issue. And of course, as you know, no one's getting a ton of really good sleep in those first couple of weeks. So again, that combo platter can be really tricky. Here are some of the symptoms: extreme agitation, confusion, hallucinating, delusions, inability to sleep, disoriented, sometimes not suicidal and homicidal ideation. And the treatment for this is, hospitalization and medication. It's a medical emergency. Okay, so here's the postpartum depression symptoms. Like, again, we're really saying it can, anytime during pregnancy or that first year postpartum. It can be feelings of anger or irritability. Again, this sort of lack of interest in the baby. Any appetite and sleep disturbances. That's so hard to assess for, the sleep disturbance piece, especially because now you have a new baby and there's a sleep disturbance anyways. Crying and sadness, feelings of guilt, shame, or hopelessness. Again, loss of interest, joy, or pleasure in things you used to enjoy. We still want you to feel like yourself at the core. And there can be some possible thoughts of harming the baby with depression, but not commonly. Postpartum anxiety. Constant worry, again, feeling that something bad is going to happen, racing thoughts, the disturbances of sleep and appetite here too, and then inability to sit still. And then we see some physical symptoms like dizziness, hot flashes, nausea. All of this very confusing because this can also look like that shift of hormones that happens after you've had a baby as well. Then we have the postpartum obsessive compulsive disorder. About 3 to 5% is what we're looking at here. So the compulsions are the actions where a mom might do certain things over and over again to reduce some of those, the fear. So some things like cleaning, constantly checking the baby, cleaning pump parts 4 or 5 times. With postpartum obsessive compulsive disorder, a mom will have a sense of horror about these compulsions and obsessions. Okay. So fear of being left alone, hypervigilance, and again, these obsessions that we call intrusive thoughts, persistent repetitive thoughts or mental images related to the baby. These thoughts are really upsetting. So that's the difference really between the OCD and the psychosis, is that someone who is concerned about what they're thinking with these intrusive thoughts automatically is precluded from having psychosis. And sometimes that validation to a new mom is all they need to kind of feel a little less stressed out about those thoughts. Again, moms with postpartum OCD know that their thoughts are bizarre. Karen Kleiman has this great book down at the bottom of this slide, Good Moms Have Scary Thoughts. It's really helpful. It really normalizes that for women. This is the postpartum rage slide. So that's a symptom of some of these other things, but again, wanted to mention it because a lot of people think, oh, I don't have anything related to the perinatal timeframe, but they're having this symptom. So struggling to control temper, an increase in screaming or swearing, punching, throwing, difficulty snapping out of it, and then flooding with emotions that are difficult to stop, and then the guilt once calmer. Right, trauma. So we know that trauma is a response to a deeply distressing event that overwhelms an individual's ability to cope. Okay. We also know that trauma is carried on a cellular level. So that goes back to the expectation versus reality piece that I was sort of speaking about, in the sense that someone could really feel like they've dealt with their trauma, but on a cellular level, it might still, be there, kind of lurking. And if something happens with the pregnancy or postpartum, can really add to this. So we know that the women with a history of trauma have a strong chance of being re-traumatized in childbirth. So 1 in 6 women in the United States have been sexually assaulted. I actually think that number is higher than that. Women who have or are currently experiencing domestic violence, about 1 in 4. 30 to 34% of women experience trauma in birth. So that's a high number, okay? Black women often experience traumatic effects of systemic racism and racial weathering. And racial weathering, again, if that's not something that you've heard, means that Black women are chromosomally 7 years older than white women in the US. And they're just really starting to do research on this and understand all the ways that it could have to do with some of the birth outcomes in Black women. So what constitutes a traumatic birth? And that is, a birth is said to be traumatic when the woman perceives that she and her baby were in danger of injury or death. Okay, so it really is that trauma is in the eye of the beholder. Just meaning you could have 2 women who went through seemingly the same childbirth experience, and for one, it could have registered as traumatic, and for the other one, maybe not. Approximately a third of these 25 to 34 traumatic births will go on to develop PTSD. A partner, a support person, a doula can also experience trauma at a birth if they believe that their partner, spouse, client are in danger of injury or death. So what might lead to one experiencing a traumatic birth? Again, any deterring from the birth plan. So if that's something that someone says, like, I had a plan and it didn't go that way, that, just red flag there. Loss of birth decisions, not just in emergencies, but feeling like you didn't have agency over what was going on for you. A long or difficult labor and delivery. Not feeling heard or feeling ignored or disregarded by the medical staff. Any unwanted intervention, so whether it's a C-section, use of the vacuum, forceps, episiotomy, or tearing, anything like that can really lead to that. An immediate whisking away of baby. The reason that the baby goes on the chest of the birthing person is because there's some regulation there of both nervous systems. If that doesn't happen, then we know that that can lead to some of the traumatic feelings. And then a NICU stay can also lead to, that birth feeling traumatic. Debrief is really important for those impacted by a traumatic birth. So if they have an opportunity to tell their story, it can really decrease the effects. So they did this study of 176 women within 72 hours of a traumatic birth. Women that were debriefed were significantly more likely to get better. So it decreased the effects of the trauma, decreased the stress, decreased the self-blame. And so that is just to say, I know that many of you will not be able to get to somebody who's had a traumatic birth within those first 72 hours, but this debrief is really huge with the repair of any sort of trauma or difficult situation. So if that's something that you can ever do for somebody, is just listen to their story, that simply will be very helpful. Impacts of untreated PMADs. Why do we care, right? So maternal depression is the #1 predictor of paternal depression, okay? 1 in 10 fathers will experience PMADs. And again, we know that there's that huge correlation between mothers who have it and fathers who have it, which is why we focus so much on the moms. It's not that we not that we don't care, we just know that that correlation is so high. There's not been a ton of research yet on same-sex couples. We assume that it's a similar kind of number. But again, that research is ongoing and really increasing now, which is great. So maternal depression has negative consequences for both the mothers and children up to about 3 years of age. We know that less than 30% of women who need treatment for PMADs will receive it. So again, we're seeing this huge gap in who needs treatment and who's getting it. Anxious or depressed parents are more likely to require more healthcare intervention, including ER or ED visits. $32,000 is the annual cost in the state of Virginia per mother-infant pair due to untreated PMADs. So this is like poor birth outcomes, poor health outcomes of the child, overusing and going to the doctor all the time, or not using the doctor enough, and then something that could have been treated very simply ends up as a more difficult case. This is lost work time, all of that. So that's a huge number when we look at the state per infant mother pair. Families who are impacted by PMADs are less likely to adhere to guidelines for safe sleep and car seat usage. And then we know there's so many other costs. So impact on marriage, relationship with other children, not having any other children, etc. So again, these untreated PMADs. So during pregnancy, pregnant women experiencing PMADs are more likely to have poor health habits, poor prenatal care, substance abuse issues. There are increased risks for poor birth outcomes, preterm labor, premature delivery, that entire list, low birth weight, prolonged labor, and then the NICU admissions. And mothers experiencing PMADs are more likely to have decreased response to baby's cues, fewer positive interactions with the baby, breastfeeding issues, and are increased risk for poor health outcomes. So impaired attachment, behavioral, cognitive, emotional issues, suicidal behavior, conduct issues, and psychiatric care. So I feel like I have to say, after I do this slide that shows us all the things that could happen, that this is wholly treatable PMADs. So I want everybody to know that, we want you to know that this is what we're looking for. We also want you to know that this is incredibly treatable and that resiliency of human beings is so incredible. So we want to know that these things can happen, and also know that we really can repair this. Again, just some of the impacts for children. So the late walking and talking, delayed readiness, learning difficulties, and then the low self-esteem, sleep problems, increased aggression, anxiety. All right, we're going to look at some vulnerable populations here. So for Latina and Spanish-speaking women, again, we know in this country that the socioeconomic status and financial barriers for people of color is just much harder. Language barriers, exposure to trauma, less likely to be insured in this country, a fear of deportation or detainment, regardless of citizenship status, especially in today's political climate. That fear has really become more prevalent. Lack of language to identify and discuss mental health challenges, that can certainly be a barrier. And then some of these environmental factors, language barriers, poverty, lack of childcare, lack of transportation. We see that just being, a barrier to care. And then we have cultural and social factors. So this historical racism with the healthcare system and reproductive health, the fear of repercussions, lack of trust in the healthcare system, and rightfully so. Fear of other interventions that may result from interaction with the healthcare system. So, CPS calls, et cetera. And then a stigma around mental illness and seeking professional help. So we know Spanish-speaking women are much more likely to utilize peer or family support. And at Postpartum Support Virginia, we've actually started a couple of Spanish-speaking groups, and they're run by peers and families, and has been really, really effective. So considerations for Black or African-American women. So again, we know this huge gap that we talked about before. So almost 1 in 2 Black women will struggle with a PMAD. Black mothers have a much higher risk of developing PMADs and are less likely to receive treatment. And 40% of Black mothers will suffer from postpartum depression. So again, that huge gap. Black women are 2 to 3 times more likely to die from pregnancy-related causes than white women. They're also 4 times as more likely to have a near miss, which is something like needing a blood transfusion, needing a hysterectomy, et cetera. And this is regardless of education level or socioeconomic status. They did a big study in New York City, and they found that a Black woman with a master's degree was still more likely to die than a white woman who had only finished 8th grade. So this really is a product of systemic racism and sort of not knowing what we're looking for in our Black women in the same way. So again, the historical racism within the healthcare system and reproductive health, the entire field of gynecology was built on white women, operating on Black women without anesthesia, and that is still perpetuated in our field today. Fear of repercussions, lack of trust in the healthcare system, and fear of other interventions that may result from interaction with the healthcare system. Stigma around mental illness and seeking help, again, that leads to a decrease in likelihood in discussing issues stemming from PMADs. Perception of self as weak or bringing shame upon the family, we see pressure to fill this role of strong Black mother. And then we see that Black women tend to experience symptoms in a more somatic way, so extreme fatigue, headache, nausea, dizziness, and often decide to tough it out. Go back one more. Okay, so we covered all that. Okay, so I wanted to give you some ideas for screening. We're really, again, the gap here is there's not a perfect screening tool, but we have the Edinburgh and we have the PHQ-9. The Edinburgh is a postnatal screening tool. It's 10 questions. I believe I have it right here. It's anybody can kind of give it. You can have a mom fill it out on their own. The problem with it is that it focuses only on depression, and so you don't get some of those anxiety, some of that measure of anxiety, but it is the only perinatal postnatal depression scale that we have. So it's just 10 questions, you score it, and then, let me see. And then it gives you a scoring guide and a guide down here that shows you like less than 8 is probably not any depression issues, 9 to 11, support, rescreen them, 12 to 13, maybe, refer them to their doctor. And then it shows you, higher what to do. Then we have the PHQ-9. This is not a postnatal test or a perinatal test. It's simply for depression. It's just 9 questions, but it definitely gives you some information about how somebody is feeling. It asks you about how you're feeling in the last 2 weeks, and then it gives you how to score it. If it's 1 to 4, your minimal depression, 5 to 9, mild, moderate, and then up from there. So it gets you some information, but those are sort of my analysis of that. There's still some gaps here. There's still some questions to be asked about this. All right, so we don't know why some people get perinatal mood and anxiety disorders and some people don't. We know it's a biopsychosocial combination, so of biological factors, psychological, and social factors. So this is the tool that we use at Postpartum Support Virginia, and it's available on our website, and I can also send it out to you all in an attachment. But I actually find this, as a mental health professional, wholly better than any of the, now I might do the other scores, but this is where I'm really getting the crux of the information that I need. So the social and environmental factors that we really need to look at are any history of childhood trauma, any, adverse childhood experiences, domestic violence, a traumatic prenatal care, labor, delivery, systemic racism, any social changes, that stuff that we talked about. If you've had a life change, a new house, a new job, loss or illness of a loved one, isolation or lack of social support, we would go ahead and check that off during COVID, right? Like no one's having the time that they thought they would. Substance use disorder, and then other issues. I love that the baby is listed here as one of the other issues. Again, if the baby is having any sort of health issue, colic, reflux, that can really, really contribute to the anxiety and depression of the new parent. A NICU stay, financial stress, low income, immigrant status, military status, and any barrier to communication. We can go ahead and check that off. The biological factors down here, again, the mental health history. If you have a personal history of mood or anxiety disorder, depression, anxiety before you got pregnant, you're at a higher risk of having something during this perinatal timeframe. A family history of a mood and anxiety disorder, I'm always shocked by how people haven't talked about this with their families. So if your mom or your sister had a perinatal mood and anxiety disorder, again, you're at a higher risk. Reproductive history, so any loss in the past, any miscarriage, stillbirth, termination, infant loss. Fertility treatments, we see a lot of this too, where people spend a lot of money and a lot of time, getting pregnant and having this baby, and then if it's anything less than perfect, right, that expectation versus reality kind of comes in here, and also the hormones involved in that. Severe premenstrual syndrome, a difficult pregnancy, labor, or delivery. Hormone changes, go ahead and check that one off. We're all having that in pregnancy and postpartum. General health, thyroid changes, anemia, lack of sleep. We check that one off too. And then the psychological factors over here at the bottom right, perfectionist tendencies. We see, especially in Northern Virginia, right, a lot of women who are top of their class and moved up in their jobs, and then they get to this, have a baby thing, and it's there's not a lot to control here that you can control. Self-esteem issues, difficulty with transitions. I would check that one off. I haven't met a whole lot of people who are really good at change. Unrealistic and rigid expectations surrounding pregnancy, labor, delivery, motherhood. What is this going to look like? Work, relationship and role issues with your partner, with your own mother. There's nothing that brings up issues about childhood, like creating a childhood for a new person. And then feeding the babies, right? Feeding a baby, breastfeeding expectations, ability, pressure. And then the weaning. Again, we see a lot of women who seemingly do very well, and then when they wean, and that hormone dip can really cause some distress here as well. The path to wellness. Again, I want to make sure that this gets delivered really clearly. There's a lot of predictors and risk factors. There's a lot of things to know about, but we know the path to wellness. And so I'm going to show you that form too. Again, it's some combo of this, right? Self-care, social support, talk therapy, medication, hospitalization. Not all of those, but some combo platter of that is going to get women well. Here's our path to wellness form. And again, I can send this out to you all. I like to always deliver this with the predictors and risk factors. So self-care, again, getting sleep. We know that that's really hard for new parents, but eventually we want to try to get all new parents to 4 to 5 hours of uninterrupted sleep. We know that that's what is restorative for the brain. And a lot of our social support at Postpartum Support Virginia is trying to figure out for people how they can get this sleep. Eating, right? Especially if you're breastfeeding, but no matter what, we want women to be eating high protein, good food, and try to take care of themselves in that way as well. Exercise, we're not talking about CrossFit here. We're just talking about gentle exercise, walk around the block, get some vitamin D and fresh air on your face, get those endorphins kind of back and moving, and then just some like agency in your body, right? Like I can move my body after I've had this huge change. Time off. So a lot of women, right? Like maybe they have a couple kids, the new baby, they're touched, all day by the baby or the kid. We really want to get them 15 to 20 minutes a day where they're not being touched out, where they're getting time to recharge. Social support, again, this can be anything. It can be one of our social support groups, a class, a church group, whatever, anything where you're connecting with other people, because we know how restorative and reparative that social support can be. Talk therapy is really, really helpful. And it doesn't have to be a long-term. I think a lot of people hear therapy and they think, oh, I have to sign up for 10 years and dig through my whole past. And I just want to, kind of put that out there that, I've had a lot of people come and do 4 sessions. We can do a lot in a short amount of time here. At the Postpartum Support Virginia website, we have a list of mental health professionals who specialize in PMADs. And they've also guaranteed us that they will call women back in a timely manner. Medication, again, sometimes medication is needed to lessen anxiety or depression. It's really effective. There's a lot of medications that are safe if women are worried about breast milk or breastfeeding. The medications can be prescribed by a PCP or an OB, gynecologist, a psychiatrist. And again, we have a list of those providers on our website that again have promised us that same thing. So talking about perinatal anxiety and depression, we heard from a lot of people, okay, this is great information. How do I say the words? Okay, so here's how we figured this out. This is what we've come up with as the easiest way to talk about some of these things. Starting with perinatal anxiety and other mood issues. For some reason in our society, it's a lot easier to talk about anxiety or to admit that you have anxiety. So we always start with perinatal anxiety and other mood issues. Emotional or mental struggles with the transition to motherhood. So again, kind of highlighting that it's a struggle, it's a transition, that this is not a permanent issue here, right? PMADs, again, which includes that range of issues during pregnancy and in the postpartum period. We know ways to get mom back on track. We're going to support mom in feeling like herself again. That really highlights an issue that we're looking for. You should still feel like you. Just like this is a time we want to watch for physical issues, same with mental health concerns. There's lots of emotions present during postpartum. We want to support you with all of them. We add that one because there's a lot of conversation with women and pressure that they're getting, like this should be the happiest time of your life, you should be happy, and we want to support you in feeling happy and also in feeling all of the other emotions, sad, overwhelmed, all of it, and sort of normalizing that this is a time of a lot of different emotions can be really helpful. The key points to convey, we found, is that mom is not at fault. This is really common. Again, you can throw out that fact that this is the number one most common complication in pregnancy and postpartum. PMADs are temporary and treatable. There are established methods for getting mom back to herself. We'll work together to learn how to use that path to wellness. That can be really helpful. And let's create your next steps for wellness. So again, conversation starters, depending on what role you're in or where you're meeting these people, but we know your comfort level is really important for normalizing some of this. So equating physical and mental health. So I know doctors have talked to you about the physical side of things during your recovery. I also want to talk to you about what to look for when it comes to emotional and mental health symptoms. Being honest, if it's a hard conversation for you to have, go for it. Just define it as such. I want to discuss perinatal anxiety and depression with you. For some reason, this can be a hard conversation, but it's really important information, so I'm going to go for it. I've had a lot of success calling out an awkward conversation before we start having it. That can be really helpful. Being straightforward, I have some information for you on perinatal anxiety and depression. We give this to all moms because up to 1 in 5 women will experience this. Bringing that predictors and risk factors guide can be really, really helpful because it makes that sheet sort of the expert on what you're looking for. So you can say, hey, I was looking at this. I want to give you some information because I noticed some of the things you've been talking about are on this list. I'm sharing this to stay ahead of any issues that may arise. And if they do, we know exactly how to get you back on track, right? Getting personal. So I want to make sure all my clients are all, have information on perinatal depression and anxiety. I have a friend, relative, coworker. I know someone who experienced this. I learned a lot. Never want anyone to struggle unnecessarily. Just using those facts, right? 1 in 5 women, 1 in 3, or 1 in 2 Black women get perinatal anxiety and depression. Since that's the case, let's keep checking in throughout your pregnancy and postpartum period. We also have an info card we can get to you if that's an easier thing for you all to use, and you can begin it with that. But this card is information, or this sheet has information. It's the most common complication of pregnancy. Signs to watch for include feeling anxious, angry, overwhelmed, or just not like yourself. There are lots of ways to get support for this, including free support groups through, Postpartum Support Virginia. And this card tells you where to go to get more information. And then any build-ons, right? Just giving you anything that feels good to you on this form you can use. So encouraging information like the path to wellness, moms recover from this. We want a mom to reach out for support as soon as she sees any signs or symptoms. Medication is not the only way to treat PMADs, nor is it always necessary. This is something that affects up to 1 in 5 new moms. The early intervention piece, like the more time that passes without the support, the longer it takes. So let's get you help. Pushing through. Some moms experience symptoms, feel like if they just try harder or push through, and that's not typically the case. There's no need to suffer. There is help and you will get better. So in the state of Virginia, again, this is our website at Postpartum Support Virginia, postpartumva.org. If it's not somebody in Virginia or if it's someone internationally, www.postpartum.net is PSI or Postpartum Support International's website. They also have their website is available in many different languages. So if you have someone that you're working with that doesn't speak, and we have English and Spanish on our website, if it's another language, that's a really good way to get information to those women and men. This is my email. You're always welcome to email me and ask any questions, comments, thoughts to me. And that is the end of all I feel like I threw a lot of information at you in a short amount of time. So certainly happy to clarify, answer any questions. I'm going to stop sharing my screen now. And so there you go.
Well, first I want to say thank you so much, Mara. That was a lot of fantastic information and a lot that I learned that I did not know about PMADs before. So I want to thank you for that. I do want to remind people that you can put questions in the chat to the right of this video. We will be taking questions now. I actually have a couple questions for you, if you don't mind.
Yeah, absolutely.
So first of all, I really appreciated knowing the fact too that people with existing mental health conditions have a higher risk of developing PMADs. I think that's really important for our community to know, for those who are thinking about or planning to get pregnant. First, I guess I wanted to see how do you sort of distinguish between a perinatal mood or anxiety disorder and a mood or anxiety disorder not associated with the perinatal period, if symptoms show up around that time period?
Yeah, I mean, anytime it's during that time frame, we're going to call it a perinatal mood or anxiety disorder. And then, looking at previous mood and anxiety disorders, we can look at what helped previously to help us and help guide us. And then if it's not something that showed up before, again, we're just going to classify that as like a new onset during the perinatal timeframe. I don't think it changes. I will say for me as a therapist, it doesn't necessarily change how I treat it, other than looking at what's been successful right? Like I will look at what's been successful for you in the past. We see a lot of people who go off of their medication to get pregnant, thinking that there's this stigma that you have to do that to get. And I would say that most psychiatrists that I work with say, stay on your medication, stay on your medication, stay on your medication. So that is one thing I just want to put out there, but we'll call it perinatal mood and anxiety disorder, just if it's in that time frame, and kind of go from there. I hope that answers your question.
Yeah, and you also answered my next question,
Okay.
which was whether treatment really differs, regardless of what it's called. But it sounds, and I know, I looked at the treatments that you were sharing all sounded very familiar to mental health conditions broadly. So
yeah.
Awesome.
It's not all new, but it's just who we connect you with, what kind of treatment we do. In therapy is a little bit more focused, right, on this and some of the intrusive thoughts about this time frame in particular.
Absolutely. I know you mentioned, I think you said less than 30% of people with PMADs actually get treatment. I was wondering if you had any thoughts on why that is. Is it stigma? Is it access, knowledge of PMADs in general?
Yeah, I think it's all of it. I think it's lack of screening. I think it's lack of knowledge about where to get resources. I think it's all of that. So I think part of it is getting the word out about how common this is. I think also people hear baby blues and they think, oh, that must be what I have, even if it goes long into it. And then I also think, I don't know how, maybe it's just my age, but I think like Andrea Yates was portrayed as like the postpartum depression story, and she actually ended up harming her children. And so people, if they're not feeling that way, don't think they have depression. So I think there's a lot of just like not knowing what this is. And what we hear from a lot of people is like, oh yeah, I had that 10 years ago, 15 years ago. So just trying to get the word out so that people know that these mental health concerns are extremely common. You don't have to be ashamed of it. And we know how to help, is really, and probably what you all are doing with just in general in life, right? That the sooner we know, the sooner we can get you feeling like yourself.
Absolutely. And just something I was curious about, I know you mentioned sort of the focus is on women who give birth, because that's primarily who experiences PMADs, but you said 1 in 10 fathers, I think it was, can experience it. Has there been research done on, parents who don't give birth, whether it's, adoption, surrogates, or I know you said there's not a lot of research on same-sex couples, but
yeah.
Has there been more on that?
Yeah, I'm hoping that's going to change, right? That we're going to see a lot more research coming out on all sorts of ways to getting to having kids. And then, there's a lot of research needing to be done around transgender folks who choose to have kids too. I mean, there's that huge hormone piece, right? So if you're a surrogate or if you're, a transgender individual, of course, that hormone issue is going to definitely be there. And I think what even adds to it more is, a lot of lack of support, right? Like if the general population doesn't have support, then certainly some of these like underserved populations don't have it. So what we're seeing is, a big increase in, support partners of, no matter what, whether they're male or female, adoption, because that can be a shift later. And again, not being able to find your community can really contribute to that. So there's a lot of parallels here, right? Is that if we could just get people some social support with people who are going through a like experience, right? And simply that would be extremely helpful. And then the screening, just being asked about it. So those are kind of the two things that I see as the issue across the board.
Awesome. I don't see any questions in the chat. People are a little bit quiet today. But I do want to ask just one more thing. So, I mean, what can organizations like us, like NAMI Northern Virginia, or people in general do to help educate the community or spread the word so that people are more aware of these issues?
Well, I think you all knowing how common it is, right? So if you do encounter someone who's struggling with this, or they know somebody that you can say, oh, that's so common, and then pass them on to us. You don't have to know everything, right? We don't have to all know all the ins and outs of everybody's mental health concern, but you certainly can pass people to us and we will get them to the support that they need, into a support group or a peer mentor, or to a therapist or psychiatrist as needed. So you don't need to know everything, just know that it's common. And that we're here for you. And of course, you can always, email me directly, and I'm happy to help support, whoever you have that needs help.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Mara. This has been fantastic. I really appreciate the information, and this will be available on our YouTube page for those that couldn't be with us live, can watch it later and get this awesome information. I do want to just put out a word for our NAMI Walks event coming up on October 9th. Biggest annual fundraising and awareness event of the year. We hope you can join us. You can visit namiwalks.org/Northern Virginia to register and learn more about it. Thank you again, Mara, and I hope everybody has a great rest of their evening.
Thanks for having me.